I'm going
Hi.
to give it another minute. Hi, I'm going to give it another minute to see if anyone else is joining us today. We have 12 signed up, so we'll see what happens. But if you could just put in the chat what school you're coming from in New Hampshire, I'd love to know where you're all coming from, which charter school. Hi, Tracy. Tracy, what do you teach at Seacoast Charter? I'm going to be coming there quite a bit soon.
I teach kindergarten. I'm going to meet with you on Monday, I think.
On Monday.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm excited. Nice to meet you, Tracy. I feel like now that I've been working with more of the charter schools, when people come on the webinars, I'm starting to recognize more and more names and schools. So that's kind of fun.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so we may be a small group here today, and that's fine. Before we get started, I'll just tell you, you can leave your camera on. You can turn it off if you need to. It is up to you today. These particular webinars in this series we're doing for charter schools are designed to be interactive, to give us a chance to, really have conversations about the content, of course, but also how this applies to our work in our schools. So feel free to leave your mic on or off. It's up to you. And especially if we just have a small group, even if a few people come up, we can treat it as though we're just sitting around a table chatting together, since there will be a small group. So, you can engage with everyone and our learning today in whatever way feels right for you. I spent the day today at Strong Foundations Charter School in Pembroke. And actually, I was there the last 3 days and doing some literacy work, some model teaching there. And I'm exhausted because I don't know the last time I taught all day for 3 days in a row. Sometimes I think, I wonder how I used to do it every day. I'm out of shape. All right, well, we'll get started. If you're someone that relies on closed captioning during Zooms, that is available for you to turn on. So go ahead and do that if you like. Other than that, we'll get started. Welcome to Supporting Teachers and Students, Strategies for Emotional Wellness at School. My name is Jacqueline Carabinas. I am the Director of Literacy at Demonstrated Success. I've been with them for about a year. And it's been really fun to be in all the different schools around the state and see how different they all are. But more than anything, I just love being with my people. I think that's one of the reasons why I left the classroom. Was I just wanted to be with teachers more often and just talk about problems of practice and talk about classroom and school life, and see what kind of things we can make happen in school. So I'm excited to be here with you today on this topic. So we have two sessions together, today and a week from now, next Thursday. And our goals for the first session are to look at the domains of educator SEL specifically, and student SEL and their purposes. We will consider the ripple effect of educator SEL to students and school culture. And we'll also explore some high leverage practices for educator SEL and consider how they might impact your classroom or transfer to the classroom. I think with SEL, one of the things that I've learned, maybe in the last 5 years, that I've really been spending some time with how SEL is integrated into our lives and integrated into school and classroom life and integrated into content, like specifically literacy. I've learned that it's just like anything else we teach. It is much harder to be a reading teacher, or when you don't read regularly and you're not remembering what that feels like to read and work through text, discover unknown words, that kind of thing. It's very hard to be a writing teacher when you never write. And so I find it to be very similar with SEL. If we aren't looking at where our own social emotional learning practices are or aren't, then we have a hard time being able to, I guess, express that with students, and finding the right language, and even understand and remember what it means to self-regulate, as an example, or name our emotions. So that is a lot of what we'll be doing today. And we just had someone else join, but I think I lost them again. Maybe Anna. Maybe you had to leave and come back. All right. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. And then next week, unless next week, unless any of our conversations shift my goals for next week, which, that can happen. But these are the general goals for next week to look at the role of educator SEL on school-wide SEL, and then we'll really dig into CASEL's SEL domains and see how those competencies fit within your school setting. Practice communication through an SEL lens, and work to make a plan for establishing a culture of community care, whether that's in your classroom or in your school, depending on your role. Actually, that's a good thing. Tracy, you are a kindergarten teacher, but Karen and Anna, would you either in the chat or unmic and let us know what your role is at your school? It's always helpful to know.
Yeah, I'm Anna, and I'm the art teacher over at Coast Charter. I work with pre-K, K, and then the middle school.
Okay, great. And sorry, I called you Anna. It was like that immediate frozen response for me. I saw ANA, so
No worries. And I do apologize. I seem to be having some connection issues, so I might be popping in and out. So yeah, I apologize for that in advance.
that's okay. Do what you need to do, and it will be recorded if you need to review.
Great, sounds good.
Oh, I can't hear you now, Karen. I can see you're talking, but now I can't hear you. Let's see.
How's that?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Great.
Yeah, for some reason, the headset that I just had on, the microphone was connecting, but the speaker wasn't, so I couldn't hear you, but whatever. So
Yeah.
I work for Spark Academy. I'm a science and technology teacher at the high school level.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, I love that. Kindergarten, high school, art. This is going to be great. We have everything covered. I'm glad you're all here. I love that. I used to do a lot of technology integration PD, and before 2020, everyone would get so thrown by those little things, like, oh, my mic. Now everyone's like, yeah, whatever, my mic wasn't working. Now everyone's just rolls with it. It's so different. And actually, I kind of love how everyone's skills have grown. So that's fantastic. So we're gonna get connected today. Here's our agenda. We have about 75 minutes together, so you can just kind of see where we're headed today. We will get a chance to talk through some practices and investigate the frameworks that I mentioned, and we'll get to have some conversation too, especially since we're such a small group. One thing I'm wondering is if each of you have nearby. If you have a phone nearby or something to write with or anything like that. A couple of the things we'll do today are on the screen with a QR code, but I also have the link that I'm going to put in the chat. So I just wanted to let you know that you can, when we get to those interactive pieces, you can scan with your phone, or if you want the link, I'll put it in the chat. That's fine too. Sometimes it's easier to do on your phone so you don't have to jump around tabs, but that is totally up to you. So this is where we're going to start today. We're really starting with ourselves and thinking about our own selves and what we bring into school as far as our own understanding of our social and emotional needs. And so in this particular quick survey, you'll be able to drag a dot from not at all to absolutely to respond to each of these statements. And so let me pull up the link for those of you that need it. And I will share that. And if you don't, you can scan the code and begin to share your thoughts. Why am I not surprised that none of us have created balance and clear boundaries for ourselves? Well, clearly not none of us. Oh, sorry. And it was rated 0 to 4 too. I was thinking I did 0 to 3, but 0 to 4. Okay. I think we all answered. So let's take a look at that. Well, actually, let's start at the beginning. So thinking about bringing your full self and full identity to school with you each day. I often think about this, and I think about how as teachers, we're kind of like putting on a show all day. I don't know if the world understands that it's like you're giving presentations and you're on a stage all day long and you've had like 30 seconds to prepare. I think that's often what I think of. And so sometimes I wonder if you have to put on like your actress face. You just kind of have to like set yourself at the door, and that can be exhausting. I think that's a lot of times the cause of burnout, right? When you're leaving yourself at the door or denying like who you are and how you're feeling every day. Yeah, Tracy, you're nodding and I see that. And I have a feeling that probably drove me out of the classroom, on top of wanting to be with teachers now that I have the language to explain that. And I think, relating this to students, and again, we'll, focus more on competencies and domains for students as we continue on today and tomorrow. But when I consider my own response to this, I wonder how students feel about this statement. How many students feel as though they could bring their full self and full identity to school with me each day, or to school with them? And even further than that, how many of them have even had a chance to understand their full identity and full selves, to know what they're leaving behind when they walk across the threshold? So recognizing and naming emotions. Yeah, I think, we're teachers. We, well, at least in my world, ELA world, we love words. So I don't know if in the science world you love words as much as we do in the ELA. Awesome. And I think that this is something that we're going to explore a little bit more today in names and naming emotions. So we'll get to that more in a bit. I'm not surprised at all by number 3. That is basically teaching in a statement. That's how you survive, rather, I think, is how you survive. And creating the balance and boundaries is something that I think has always been hard for this profession, but I've been seeing more evidence in schools lately of people saying no, and people shutting down and trying to reclaim their weekends or whatever balance and boundaries looks like for you. So that is something that I'm going to make a note of, that we can be sure to revisit, since that is definitely, looking at the data, that is our area of growth that we need. All right, let me jump back out here. So the first time I spoke with any staff about SEL practices, this is I came across this meme, and I don't know if any of you watch this show. Yeah, this Abbott Elementary gets so many things right. And I would say that even though I've never personally taught in a school like Abbott Elementary, from traveling around schools, I feel like this show gets so many things right. But I love this meme, and it completely reminds me of how I feel sometimes when I'm doing SEL work with teachers, because this is something that comes up a lot, remember your why, and almost as in a way that it can be weaponized, I think, in some situations. If there are systemic issues in the institution of school that are keeping you from maintaining your emotional health, remembering your why, that's not really going to change a whole lot in the long run. And so while it is certainly important to find purpose in our work every day, and that's something, of course, we want students to find purpose in their work and have some agency as well, we can't deny that just knowing your why is what's going to get us through and continue to sustain in this profession. So I think she gets the facial expression right on point here. So I'm actually realizing now that I am starting with a video, I didn't test my video sound. So I'm going to start it, and just give me a thumbs up or not if it's coming through all right. And then if not, I'll back up. So in this video, I really liked how this teacher talks about how she identifies her own needs and is really kind of vulnerable with her students. And so I thought it would be good to hear what she has to say. All right, see, that's what happens when you don't test your audio. Let me just go back and make sure I'm sharing my audio. All right, so while I'm getting through this, I'll tell you that there are I found a number of really helpful YouTube channels that give examples of how a lot of this work is integrated in the classroom. I feel like it's one of those things that you do kind of need to see sometimes. So I just kind of wanted to recommend that. All right, this is take 2. And if it doesn't work, I will just tell you what she said because that's the kind of day we're having. I will just, I'll investigate that for next time. So we'll just kind of take a little shift here. But she talks a lot about vulnerability and how she finds that sort of, you know, understanding that being vulnerable with your students and being just human enough that your students can kind of see you as teacher and human, that's a different balance at different grade levels, I think. That is a very different thing at kindergarten than it is in high school, right? Like it is a very different beast. And I even am reminded of that even just today. Every time I go into a middle school classroom, I am terrified. I am absolutely terrified. I don't know why. It's probably because my life was 3rd and 4th grade for so long. But Karen, maybe, I don't know, maybe you have some stories to share with us, but I feel like there's a very fine line the older kids get with showing vulnerability, but still remaining teacher. You know what I mean? It's tricky. It's tricky. Whereas kindergartners, they're all over it.
Yeah,
So hopefully,
high school
yeah.
students do react very different to that. Sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, that's too much information. I don't need to know that. And then sometimes you get, like, I have students that over empathize. If anything, like we have a teacher out right now. He was sick on Monday, ended up having an issue at school that he's been out the rest of the week. And so there's some students that are like, oh yeah, he'll be back on Monday. And there's other students that are like, oh my gosh, we have to get him a card. We have to buy him all this other. And so there's these very, very polar opposite ends of how students react to teachers being human at the high school level. Because some of them don't want you to be human. They want you to just be the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the equivalent of seeing your kindergarten teacher in the grocery store. It's like, wait a minute, you go grocery shopping? Where high school kids are like, wait a minute, you get sick? You know, you have to lay in bed and, right? All of those, yeah, all of that. So it is very different. But I think that, you know, just like I started off saying at the beginning, finding ways to understand ourselves and figure out the right way to bring that to our students and bring that into the classroom. I mean, that's going to be personal. It's going to, of course, depend on your context and the age. But I think that just like any other subject, we really have to live and sort of own the content sometimes. And if the content is SEL, we need to do that and model that, model our thinking, model our language, from everything from, you know, what we say when we make a mistake to, you know, if we're having a stressful day, taking a deep breath and explaining why we're taking a deep breath. There are so many little things that you can model throughout the day, that whereas, you know, younger kids, sometimes they show more interest and they respond. I think I've decided that, especially middle schoolers, I think they're all just staring at me. This is kind of what I've discovered, but I think they're listening. I think they're on board. You know, they just don't want to quite let me know that that they're listening to what I have to say or relating with me in any way. But yeah. So anyway, I just want to put that out there that any little ways we can find to model and sort of walk the walk, I guess, is super helpful. So thinking about SEL for educators, it is specifically designed or defined for educators by this organization, Transforming Education. And I'll have lots of resources for you. And this is an organization that does specifically look at SEL for educators. A lot of us are familiar with or have heard about the CASEL competencies and domains for students, and we are going to look at those and the connections and parallels. But this is specifically designed for educators to help us really understand the competencies and domains that affect our lives, our professional lives day to day. And so this is what helps us create the kind of classroom environment we know that is going to be supportive and supportive for students. It also helps us embody those skills and mindsets so we can model and coach, and really helps us to maintain the overall well-being and emotional state, which is not always easy to do in schools. I feel like especially in the last couple of years, it's really hard to maintain overall well-being, and it takes a lot of really, it takes a lot of work, I guess is the best way to say it. So certainly these social emotional learning, as we think with students, there's a lot of overlap with emotional intelligence, resilience. All of these things, we'll see the overlaps between the educator and student SEL, but the components of SEL for adults are unique because we're looking for building self-awareness and development of skills. So that's something that's similar, but something different is we are looking to leverage these skills in relationships and in the classroom school dynamics. And so we're shifting between, we're speaking with community members or colleagues, students, families, school board. And so we have to constantly shift between these different settings and try to leverage the skills that we're building. But again, it helps us implement this curriculum more effectively because we've taken the time to explore it ourselves. I would also say that, if you're someone that really has worked hard on trying to hear what others are really trying to say, like if you have a colleague that, tends to be a challenging person to talk to, an example of practicing this to improve relationships is just that ability to really kind of just see more where they're coming from and less about, how they might be taking up space in that moment and how that is impacting you, but really turning it around and trying to see where they are coming from, just as an example. So we know that this supports school priorities, and it's one of those things where we make time in schools for what we prioritize. There are so many things to accomplish in school, but sometimes taking a step back to really identify our school priorities can help us understand, are we making the choices in our scheduling, in our curriculum, in our programming that support our primary priorities? And so while all of these are important things in schools, I just want you to take a quick glance down the list and see if there's one in particular that you find to be a really key priority at your school for the whole school community, not just for staff. Perhaps, mental health issues are a challenge throughout students and staff, or perhaps there's a lot of bullying and isolation in the type of school that you're working in. Maybe if you're working with older students, is the priority helping students prepare for what's next? Or are you in a school that's really still dealing with the impact of the pandemic on their learning? So if you could just take a look, and if you were to pick one that you feel like is kind of a top priority at your school, would you just put it in the chat? Or I guess you can just unmic. I keep saying put it in the chat, but there's only 3 of you, so either way.
So, Jacqueline, you're saying what do we prioritize the most at our school? Okay.
Yeah, or I
what's
guess
the challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good clarification. So I would say, yeah, what would be a priority, meaning it's something that you feel like you really need to work on in your
Okay.
school.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't really feel there's anything at these funny.
Yeah.
I would say I feel like we make or we're trying to make mental health a priority.
Mhm.
So I would say that's one thing we're working on.
Huh. Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, you're an arts-based charter school, and it's the most natural connection, I think. So it's already, I feel like by default, your school is set up to have students be able to explore themselves, explore emotions, explore how they interact with the world in different ways.
We're actually experiencing a lot of math deficit from COVID-19. So at the high school level, these kids went through several grades of like middle school where they didn't get enough math background. And so now they're here at the high school level and we expect them to do algebra 1 and they're pre-algebra if we're lucky. Some of them even before that. So we really struggle with the whole math content and what the pandemic did for that. I do believe that like the school safety, we actually are really good about that. As a staff, we meet regularly. We talk about how different students are interacting. And the minute anybody talks about anything bullying, we're on top of that. We also are a small school. Like, I don't know how big your school is, Tracy, but we have a total of 92 students. So it's really easy to stay on top of that bullying part. But in that 92 students, we have a significant number of them that are math deficient. So that's really been a struggle for us, that COVID part. We also have a group of students, they were the ones that were the most isolated during COVID, that we have a hard time, like their social skills are very lacking. So there are seniors this year and they really just don't interact well with anybody or anything. They're graduating. We're trying to get their graduation planned and they're not engaging. It's like we're planning your graduation. They're not engaging. So, yeah.
That social skill piece is, I was thinking about this yesterday and I was thinking, okay, so now we're at the point where kids who are starting kindergarten they were born in like 2019-ish, right, Tracy? So
Yeah.
they haven't had the academic impact, but they have a social impact. They must, because they were toddlers when everything shut down, right?
Yeah,
Is that
I
what
would
you're seeing?
definitely say COVID-19 is also yeah, I am seeing it in my classroom, like particularly with like independent skills, kind of those self-help skills, and even the social piece. Uh, that we go like, is this COVID-19? Is it not? We're talking definitely having that conversation a lot.
Right. It's hard to know, like, is it the way society is right now?
Yeah,
Although we could say that that's also a direct, or, that's an
exactly.
impact.
I
Yeah.
feel like it's just like kind of a circular conversation. Is it
Mhm.
going back to that?
Right. Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, as frustrating as it is, at some point we have to say, this is this is what it is. Whoever walks through the door is who walks through the door in the classroom, and that's where you go.
I think we gotta just kind of meet what it is right now and figure out how to
Mhm.
go forward. Yeah. So,
Yeah, one of my longtime mentors and colleagues has been saying that there is no such thing as should anymore. Like, there never really was should, with learning, if you're meeting learners where they are. But Karen, I'm thinking of what you were just saying. There is an expectation that if you're going to come to high school and take algebra, that there are things that you have done, things that you should have mastered along the way. And almost as though we've had to completely throw should out the window,
Yep.
especially at charter schools, because we don't know where they're coming from. They could be coming from all kinds of places.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like the charter school students, so I taught in public school for a while. This is my first go around at charter school, and I find that the diversity of the students coming in from charter schools to us, because they come in from homeschool, they come from charter schools, some of them come from public school, but not a significant number of our students. And I find that they're all over the place, like what they've done, where they are emotionally, where they are learning wise, it's all over the map. Like in public school, it was kind of more streamlined, I think, in the content at least, but maybe not in the social and emotional part, but definitely in the content, it was more of a streamlined in the public school. At this charter school, I just feel like there's such a diverse group of people that come in, some that have been homeschooled that are very elevated for high school students, some that were homeschooled that are not. We have to make it all work.
Right. Does your school, you said high school, is your school 9 to 12? I don't know Spark very well at all. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're a 9 to 12 public charter. We're located on Manchester Community College's campus.
Oh,
And our program is actually fully integrated with the college, where the purpose is to get high school students college credit right out of the gate. So if they follow our path, they can graduate high school with, at the very least, a certificate. But some of them have even taken enough classes to graduate with an associate's degree at the same time they graduate with their high school diploma.
that's awesome.
Yeah. That's great.
I've loved learning. I mean, every charter school is so unique. I mean, public schools, I mean, right, public charter, public schools, everything, every school is so unique. But specifically charters, hearing how, you know, the mission that each school is forming around is always so fascinating to me, because there's just such a wide range, such a neat model. Would you say, Karen, that most students that come to you and come to the school in ninth grade stay 9, 10, 11, 12, or is it kind of in out population?
I'd say 75%. I think we have it's probably a little higher than that, but if you're counting, we had a lot of attrition in and around COVID. Like we had parents that were trying to find a small, safe environment for their kids. And so we had a lot of students sign up to come to this school and then realize that this isn't the direction their kids wanted to go in. So I heard, Tracy, something about yours is an art-based school.
Or arts integrated, yeah.
Okay, so we've had students come here. We're a technology school.
Okay.
And they're like, I want to go draw. And I'm like, well,
we get that too, I think, sometimes. Like, yeah.
So we had a whole bunch of students that came in right towards the end of COVID. And so that group right then, we had a pretty high attrition because they were just trying to find a smaller, safer place for their kids to go to school. But the core curriculum here was just not what their child was interested in. So since then, these last 2 years, we've actually had a much smaller attrition rate. But we start out with a small, each class. So starting in September, we'll start 30 new students because we don't have the classroom space to have more than a maximum of 120 students. Because we're sharing space with the college, we don't take in more than 30 students. We generally end up with about 25 students in a cohort by the time we're done. So we take in 30, we lose 5 between first year and fourth year.
You mentioned, Karen, finding a safe place to go to school. Is that in response to the previous school experiences that students were having, or is that in response to them being at home alone during the pandemic, or maybe both,
I think
actually?
a little bit of both, but I do know that in particular that not like this year, last year, but the year before that, that first year when we were finally kind of coming out of COVID, it was really about a smaller environment, less exposure to things like COVID, less exposure to things like bullying. I mean, for such a small school, we have a very diverse group of students as far as their LGBTQ rating or their whether they like to do sports or not, whether they like there's just I feel like all of these students are very diverse. And in our community, I think a lot of the students feel very comfortable expressing who they are. Like we have a lot of students that come out and say, I'm gay or I'm a lesbian or I'm binary, non-binary, and they just aren't afraid to say that because we embrace that kind of environment here. Most public schools don't. If they were to say that in a group of their homeroom kids, they would probably get ostracized by about half the homeroom class. And I've had that happen when I was teaching at public school. I've had a student who really suffered mentally and emotionally because they didn't feel safe saying what they really wanted, how they wanted people to address them. Like they wanted to dress different. And my homeroom class was not very receptive to that. And I'm not sure if that's all over the place, but that was my experience at the true public high school, not a charter school.
Yeah, I think that's an example of, you know, the the culture of the school. I mean, there's only so much you can do in the culture of your classroom. I think well, let me rewind. When you're a self-contained classroom, like in elementary school, you kind of have a little bit more control over the culture of your classroom all day, right? But when you're, high schools, kids are bouncing around room to room. So it's very hard to have if your school culture doesn't embrace that and set everyone up for success to include all students. Even if you yourself are trying to set up your classroom for that, if the school culture isn't that way, it's like swimming upstream, right?
And that's really what it felt like when I was, and even here, we had a math teacher here who we let go because he did not embrace what we were trying to do here for the culture. And in fact, was very vocal and kind of abusive about how he spoke to students he didn't approve of. So he didn't last here very long, which I'm very thankful for.
Well, I think you named it earlier too. You kept saying like our community. And so that I can tell by the way you describe your school that that's who you are. And so it's like, this is who we are. So, if you're not really along for the ride, you might be better off somewhere else.
Unfortunately, we can't say that. Public charter school, we have to take them all.
Oh no, I didn't mean with students. I meant with staff.
Oh yes, definitely. And even now where it's really hard to find certain staff, like he was a math teacher. We're having a hard time finding math teachers right now. But even with that, we are a better school for not having that person here teaching.
Yeah. Interesting. So the two main resources that we'll be relying on throughout this session and next week are CASEL, and they're sort of the gold standard right now for the organization that is really leading SEL practices and in schools. And so the other one that I referred to, Transforming Education, this was the organization that specifically is defining educator SEL, and they have actually some really neat self-paced, they're kind of courses, I guess, series of videos where they break down the various domains. There are a ton of resources for you as an educator in your own social emotional learning growth. So I highly recommend checking out their resources, and we'll dig into a few as well. So on the left, you can see this is the educator SEL wheel as defined by Transforming Education. And on the right is the one as defined by CASEL. And I think that it's not that, educators and students alike can't learn and try to achieve the competencies all in the CASEL one. But you'll notice that there are things that on the left with the educator SEL that just more clearly define what we need to do as adults in order to sort of lead a safe community, an inclusive community. And I think, these were part of when we rated things at the very beginning. I got those 4 statements from this wheel. And so the idea being that if we're able to achieve competencies or find success in these domains for educator SEL, then we will have a much easier time being able to understand where students are with these domains and understand kind of the self-work and what that feels like to change behaviors or change mindset or awareness. And so certainly there's overlaps, but I really like to pull these apart and then kind of put them back together later so that we can see what's specific to teachers. And you know what? I just randomly made the discovery of why the sound wasn't working. It's because I have headphones in. I just remembered that is the issue. So we'll deal with that later. Okay, so we are going to, let's see. I feel like we've already done this. So I'm just going to keep moving because there's only 3 of us. So we're getting to know each other pretty well. I think we've already sort of named that balance and boundaries are tricky for us. So we'll just kind of hang on to that information and think about, when we're trying to improve something. So we'll say balance and boundaries since that was the lowest for us as a group. Making personal changes and being able to find the language to describe those and even then make the connection to what that would look like with students. It takes these 4 things. So I feel like it takes a lot of metacognition, this thinking about your thinking. This is very much a word I use a lot in the literacy world when I'm helping students understand how to pay attention when they're reading to keep track of what they're doing in their mind. So again, it's thinking about your thinking. And it's the same thing with understanding, your emotional response or lack thereof to something. So one of the things I noticed with establishing balance and boundaries is I noticed the narrative in my head. The narrative in my head that starts to tell me, oh, it's actually not that bad. Like your schedule isn't really that full, or you've had a week busy like this before. You can certainly throw one more thing in, right? And so the more metacognitive I am about the narrative in my head, the easier it is to talk myself out of remembering why I need to establish boundaries. Because once you're in it, it's easy to talk yourself out of it. It's when you're like laying in bed at night, you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this time. I'm not, I'm going to set my schedule and I'm going to say no, I'm not going to do any more committees or whatever it might be. But really trying to stop the narrative and pay attention to it so you can stop it is helpful. And I think also really looking at like observing what happens when you don't listen to your thinking. So observing, how is your body physically responding after, 3 days of you doing way too much and you knew it was too much, but you said, I can handle it. And then stopping to really pay attention. Okay, how did this impact me? And did I lash out on my partner? Or my students or my daughter, how did that impact everyone around me and, not just myself? Also thinking through, once you try to start to use strategies, really noting why something works or not. I feel like I am the queen of saying that this strategy is amazing, this will work, and I know it and I've done it. And then when I am confronted with a time where I know the right strategy to use, I start to throw a little bit of a temper tantrum. Like, I feel like I shouldn't have to do this. Like, why can't I just, fill in the blank? So I don't know if any of you relate with that. Just kind of like, why do I have to take a deep breath and be mindful right now? Like, I don't really want to. So I feel like it's easy to say, like, let's use these strategies. But we also know that, we're pushing back because using a strategy means stopping. And it means slowing down. And it means maybe shifting your goals for the day or shifting your expectations of what you were able to accomplish in a day. And that is really, really tricky. And we've already talked a little bit about vulnerability. I feel like the more we talk about these things, whether you have a close friend or you talk about it with a partner, or you constantly are seeking after PD where you can talk about these and your feelings. And so you're here now, so I can tell that you're interested in this content. The more we talk about it, the easier it is to be vulnerable by describing some of the things that we're trying. So we're going to take a look. Let me just check time. Okay. So what you'll notice is as we move through some strategies today and next week, I'll kind of point out on the wheel, you'll see on the slide, I'm pointing out on the wheel where it lands for either educator SEL or for student SEL. So we can start to name those overlaps. But this wheel, you can kind of think of it as like a menu of a lot of this, the strategies that are to come, whether today or next Thursday. And so these are some of the strategies that I pulled out that I find useful or have found useful when working with staff. And this is sort of the domain they fit in. And certainly strategies can fit in multiple domains, but I placed them in the domain that they seem to most fit. And so this is one we talked about earlier. I think this is probably one of my favorite, probably because I love words. But I also have found so many ways to integrate this into vocabulary instruction. I mean, I can think of so many things that you can do already. I'm thinking of your school, Tracy, in the arts world, how many different ways you can represent your emotions with movement or with music and visually or art, visual art, things like that. And putting a word to it sometimes is like can be a really challenging thing. So I feel like it's a good exercise. And what happens when we name an emotion, and I sometimes get really geeky, I get into the neuroscience of things. It's really hard to understand, but I do get excited about it. I love knowing that my brain is doing something, right? So when I'm labeling something, that my brain is calming down. Like I'm saying, you know what, this feeling right now, this is anger, or, this is envy, or whatever it might be. Naming something allows my brain to say like, hey, we're going to calm down because now we're able to say what this is. That is something that I feel like I've had to do a lot. I've had to do a lot. I mean, I would say in the last 10 years, especially since leaving the classroom, when I feel like I've had the time and the space to start to piece together all of those emotions I was feeling during my classroom career. But this second bullet is really interesting to me, that it creates that distance between ourselves and the experience. It's like saying, I'm feeling this. It's almost like when we give it a name, we can kind of like set it over here. Like it's almost like it takes it outside. I don't know. I feel like it takes it out of like in here in our hearts, and we can like see the separation. And it's the distance that can really help us decide what is next. And so that is something I've found a lot of success with, and we're going to play with that in a little bit, in 2 slides actually. So what I found was that I was able to recognize, I can recognize my like physical response. And so think of yourself, during a time where you've had a physical response to something, whether it's at school or elsewhere, it doesn't really matter. Or maybe, you're in a conversation with the colleague I mentioned earlier, one that's really challenging for you, or a parent or a caregiver, that when you see the email in your inbox with their name on it, your whole body just kind of like it flushes, and you just don't know what's going to happen when you open it. And so I feel like that's the first step, is noticing that physical response and kind of naming what you feel and where you feel it. And it seems, I feel like sometimes it seems silly to take the time to stop and do that. But I think I've discovered that you can't really, it's hard to name the feeling accurately if you don't name what it's doing to you. And so it's something we're going to try in just a moment here with two resources. So I have two resources that I have been using to label emotions. And so this is from I say Junto Institute because I also speak Spanish, but it could be Junto. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. This is an emotion and feeling wheel, and I like visually that it groups, it groups a lot of similar words together. So it's kind of, if you find your word of what you think is describing your feelings, but it's not quite accurate, you can just kind of move around within the color. But the other one, and I'll give you these links, the other one that I've found really useful are the 87 human emotions and experiences as described by Brene Brown in Atlas of the Heart. So, true confession, I am, I think there are people that are like a Brene Brown person, right? Like people are like, yes, Brene Brown, all the things all the time. I was never that person, and I'm not now. But this book, I bought this book. Does anyone have this on the call here? Tracy, Karen, Ariana?
I don't have it, but I have heard her talking about it on podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I forget where I first came across it, but then when I found out it was a book that categorized different feelings, and she then breaks them down, and she breaks all of these down and gives examples, and then you, in such a way that you can really see the difference between them. Whereas on the wheel, it's hard to see except for how the colors are, how they're related. The way she describes them in Atlas of the Heart is she gives very specific examples, and then she continues on, like she does, with research to explain what she found in the field. And so I like to refer to both of these when I'm practicing naming emotions with staff or with students, because they speak to different people in different ways. So we'll have a chance to look at both. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to practice. I'm not going to make you share anything super personal. So if you're worried about that, don't worry. We're just going to do a little bit of self work right now. But I want you to recall a positive experience, and you'll jot down the first word. You can write if you have a notebook nearby, or you want to do it on your computer or your phone, or you just want to do it in your head. Either way, totally fine. So recall a positive experience and jot down the first word or words that come to mind about how you felt. And then we'll do it with a negative experience, jotting down the first word or words. And then we'll take some time to shift over to the feelings wheel or the Brene Brown's chart, and I'll pop the links in the chat for you in a moment, to see if you can find your words and where your words would be, and see if you feel like you chose the most accurate words, or if you feel like you can find a better one. I'm going to grab those links for you right now. And here's one, and here's two. All right, so now you have both of those, so I can flip back here and let's see. All right, so let's see, it is 4:29. Let's take like 5 minutes to jot these things down and refer to the wheels or chart to see what we find with our word choices.
All right, so you don't have to share the experience, but I'm curious about some of the words that anyone chose for the positive experience. If anyone is feeling vulnerable enough to share a word that you used to describe, and then if you feel like it was the right word, or if you found some other ones too.
I'll share that I originally wrote joy, but after looking through, I think maybe it was more proud was the better choice.
Yeah.
And for the negative, I wrote anxiety. then when I looked at Brene Brown, I think I was thinking it was maybe like an overwhelmed, but I felt from the wheel inadequate was really more the feeling I was having. And that was surprising to me because when I looked through the wheel, I was like, no, that definitely was more what it was. I would never have thought that was the word, but it was.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting, right? Like we're like, yeah, we're adults. Like we can name how we're feeling until we can't.
No.
Thanks for sharing that, Tracy. I think the one thing that blew my mind when I started to look at the shades of meaning between some of these words was jealousy and envy. I was like, how am I, as old as I am, and I don't know I didn't know the difference between jealousy and envy.
Hmm.
That was news to me as of last year. Oh, go ahead,
So
Karen.
I actually, my positive experience, the word that I picked was amazed. And I didn't see anything that I felt fit that scenario of why I was amazed in the 87 human emotions, but I did find a link connection within the wheel. So you look at the word surprise and you end up linking it and you get to amazed. And I would have to say that I was surprised. So what it was is I actually went to see one of my students in a play at a local theater. And he's a very happy-go-lucky, jovial student here. He dances down the hall, he sings to himself all the time. He played a bad guy, like an evil guy in the play. And I was so amazed at one, how well he did it, and then surprised that he was that good at playing a bad guy because he is never that personality at school, like ever. So it was like, wow, he did that really well.
So great. I love that you went to see the play. That's really fantastic.
There was actually five of us from the staff, three staff and their spouses went and saw him, and he was, when he got done and we all gave him flowers and congratulated him, he was very, I think he was as surprised to see us there. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all of you guys came to see me in my play. But and then I had a bad experience with my vehicle recently, and the place that I brought my vehicle to be fixed actually did more damage to it instead of fixing it. And at first I would say I was angry about it, but I think it was more than just anger. Like I was feeling very hostile. I was hostile. I wanted to fight with them about this damage to my vehicle. And that kind of surprised me when I thought,
Especially because you were right. I feel like that when I know I'm right about something, which I think my husband might argue this one, but when I know I'm right about something, that feeling that I get when I'm arguing it, I think you just gave me my word, Karen. I think it's hostility. I feel hostility toward the person that cannot clearly see why they are wrong. Karen, when you think back on that feeling, like can you remember like your body's physical response, like heat or tension
oh yeah,
or dizziness?
both.
Like, yeah.
Not dizziness, but there's very definitely heat. My body was very tense because and I think there was some anger in there because that they refused to acknowledge that they did this other thing to my vehicle.
Makes me think of how, so many times with students, they might be having an emotion um, or some sort of response when we're working with them, and we have no idea how many things came before that. And so, like you were saying, first it was anger and then it was hostility. And so, learning how to name these can help us see the progression. And I think with students, just us alone being aware that how emotions can escalate when one thing layers on top of the other, it allows us to see that more clearly with students. You know, if a student comes in the door and they completely erupt within 10 minutes of being in the classroom, you know, backtracking a little bit about where, you know, where this began and how it escalated, sometimes is the way to get to the bottom of it. So hard as teachers to not take things personally. Like we want to respond immediately, like, what the heck? Like I'm giving you attention right now. You know, I'll give you whatever you need. Just like calm down. You know, this, you know, but reminding ourselves that it's not about us all the time, even though, you know, we're there and we're ready to support. That doesn't mean that students always understand that at a variety of ages, right? I mean, that's a range of ages. So when I think about, I mean, I'm just going to kind of let this question sit for a little bit. We don't need to necessarily answer this. But one of the things that where this naturally integrates, you know, in the classroom, at least when you think in terms of in literacy, and I know you're science, Karen, so I'm really interested to see how we can think through this through a science lens. But expanding students' vocabulary in labeling emotions through their actions, through conversations, through stories, through writing, and any opportunity we get to recognize these, you know, emotions and name them when it's not us, sort of builds our vocabulary and our understanding of how we might label our own feelings and emotions. So I think I'm gonna, I want to think through this through a science lens, but I'm gonna tuck it in the back of my mind. I have some thoughts, but we'll come back to that because I'm interested to see where we might go with that. So just like I expected with a small group, because we're a small group and we get to just chat like we're sitting around a table, we are out of time and we didn't make it to the end, but that's fine. The one thing that I do want to make sure that I do before we are out is, let's come back to this one. This is one practice that I also wanted to look at today. And so I'm gonna leave you with this one today as something to keep in mind between this week and next week when we dig into a few more practices and begin to think more about how students can use some of these strategies. But this is I find this to be a very concrete exercise when you're frustrated about things, to be able to separate. When you can name the things that are within your control, within your influence, or way beyond your control, and not just sitting and thinking about it. I feel like actually drawing out the circles and, you know, making yourself, or I should just say making the time and space for yourself to fill in those circles in response to something that's really challenging, either in your personal or professional life right now, is a really good way to sort of recenter sometimes and see what it is that you can actually do about a given situation. And so I want to leave you with this one so you can keep it in mind. And then when we meet next week, we can kind of see if this showed up for you at any point across the week where you were able to sort of name something that was beyond your control, and you were able to separate it and see it. But this is really lovely having such a small group. Looks like Anna left us again, so I hope Anna had a good time while she was here. Tell her we said hello and goodbye, Tracy. And we'll meet again next week and we'll continue looking at some practices and dig deeper into the CASEL wheel to really understand those competencies and what this looks like in the classroom.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a great
Have a
rest
good
of your
night.
week.
Bye, you too. Thank you.